So what we're doing today is we're planning for a 50-year plan. And this is a very delicate balancing act between trying to provide guidance for the developments that are happening today and tomorrow in the Portlands while still maintaining the vision that we like to see happen in 30 years and then enabling further development to happen in 50 years that we may not know what that could be today. So what we're talking about today is three different components of this plan. It's the framework plan, the overarching vision for the Portlands, as well as the South of Eastern and Portlands Transportation Servicing Master Plan EA and the Villiers Island Precinct Plan. Now, these all plans are interconnected, but they're also connected to various other planning studies that have gone on and are going on within the Portlands and surrounding area, including the Donmouth Naturalization Project and the Film Studio Precinct and the South of Eastern Strategic Directions.
So we'll just provide a little bit of background. The idea of this overview presentation is to get you oriented. Most of the detailed information associated with the plans are going to be presented at the information stations, or sorry, information sessions. We changed the title. At the information sessions, and they're on the board. So this is really, we're 10,000 feet up in the air. We're getting you oriented into what we've been doing for the last 2 years. Giving you the big sort of picture, and then you can get all of the information and ask all of the detailed questions at the information sessions. So for the Portlands Planning Framework, so this is a big plan that applies across a 350 hectare area. And the idea is that it's going to guide revitalization and redevelopment over the long term. The Central Waterfront Secondary Plan is the current planning regime in place for the Portlands and the rest of the Central Waterfront, but it's a very high-level plan. And so what we want to be doing is providing more robust direction for various different things than is currently included in that plan. And we also want to be able to integrate and incorporate the outcomes of the Donmouth Naturalization and Portlands Flood Protection Project EA, as well as the Lower Donlands Infrastructure EA that was completed last year, or this year actually. And we also want to ensure this is a big public undertaking, and we want to ensure that both public and private investments maximize the full potential of the Portlands. And lastly, there are a bunch of outstanding appeals to the Ontario Municipal Board of the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan, many of them in the Portlands. And so we're hoping to resolve some of those. But my joke is, and not create any new ones, but we'll see what ends up happening. For the planning framework, we've been really tackling two big things over the last 2 years. One is land use, and the other is urban structure. And I think I see some very familiar faces. And so last year we came out with land use options, and we also came out with transportation and servicing alternatives. And we elicited feedback on the land use. And then we presented a land use direction to City Council in July of 2014. And what we said was that we were going to continue to refine that land use direction through the rest of this process. So today we're going to be presenting where we're landing on the preferred land use direction. And we've also been working through on the urban structure. So what is urban structure? Basically, it's the skeleton. It's the bones that make a city work. It's the streets, it's the parks, it's the open spaces, it's everything that we kind of take for granted, but they're our largest civic assets, and they're the setting for community life. So it's a really important thing that we get right, and that we lay in place the proper foundation to allow the Portlands to evolve. As well as the South of Eastern area to allow continued employment growth in that particular area. We're also dealing with, there's a whole bunch of arrows that come down. Those are some of the other aspects that we're dealing with in the planning framework. And again, really just to provide some more robust direction in the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan for some of these key elements. We're doing the planning framework as an integrated process with the Portlands and South of Eastern Transportation and Servicing Master Plan EA, which you'd think after 2 years we would have come up with a better name, but we didn't. And so we're sticking with it. Basically, we're trying to do coordinated infrastructure planning along with these studies, and we're trying to identify what is the preferred street, transit, and municipal servicing network that's needed to support revitalization and redevelopment and continued employment growth. And it ties together the planning that's been happening in both the South of Eastern area as well as the Portlands. And the key map up there just shows what the study area is. We're not looking at the Lower Donlands because that infrastructure has already been addressed. There's 5 phases to a municipal class environmental assessment, and currently we're in the second phase, which is the identification of alternative solutions, a comprehensive evaluation of those solutions, and the presentation of a preferred solution. So today, we're presenting what our preferred solution is to get feedback. Once we get that feedback, we would refine the preferred solution, and then we would present it to City Council in spring of next year. What would happen once the master plan is completed is we would undertake to complete the EA process for specific projects, which we haven't determined what those projects will be yet, but that's when we get into alternative design. So what we're showing is conceptual to a certain extent at this particular stage, but we have done a lot of work, so we know that the street network works, we know that the municipal servicing works, and we'll just have to continue to refine that as we go through the remaining EA process.
So Villiers Island Precinct Plan is the first community in the Portlands that is undergoing the precinct planning exercise. And what that is it's a more detailed exercise that bases on community building. So we're looking at a fine-grained local street pattern, block structure, establishing minimum and maximum height regime to create a varied built form. We're looking at various land uses and strategies to ensure that we create a great mixed-use community, looking at the locations of parks and community facilities and what those parks should be and what role they play in the new community, looking at environmental performance standards as well as public art and urban design guidelines to help again, grow and create this new community. Looking at affordable housing strategies, as well as the appropriate heritage conservation strategies, and then parking provisions as well. So again, community building. There are currently other plans on hold in the Portlands. We're looking at these, I can't point. Oh, no, I don't know. The Polson Key Precinct Plan and the Film Studio Precinct Plan are currently on hold pending completion of the Transportation Servicing Master Plan, EA, and the Framework Plan, as well as some other further studies that are required before they can go forward for precinct planning. As well, there's the South of Eastern Strategic Directions exercise, which the background study has been completed, but the recommended directions report is pending, again, completion of the EA, the Transportation Servicing Master Plan, EA.
So over the last 2 years, we've amassed way too much information, which is one of the reasons why we're here all day on a Saturday. But we've also consulted quite extensively, and so this just kind of gives a snapshot of all of the different inputs that have gone into all of the various different plans. So we've looked at provincial policies and legislation, we established a biodiversity working group, we undertook a noise and air quality study, we held a 2-day charrette down in the Portlands. We had a boat tour. It was a lot of fun for people who were able to attend. We've also been doing some really detailed transportation and hydrological modeling to help confirm the street network and as well as the servicing. And then we've just consulted with a wide range of different people from meeting with First Nations groups we have a stakeholder advisory committee, which many people are here, and thank you all for your input throughout the years. We also have a landowner and user advisory committee that we've been consulting with. And then we've been doing some more detailed consultation with the film sector in the city, which is a big, important sector for the city. So there's been a lot of inputs that have gone into these plans, and we want to continue to get everybody's feedback on it to make the plans really good, viable, and that will have meaning in 50 years from now, that somebody can pick it up and go, hey, yeah, that still makes sense in 2065. Those girls, they did a real good job. This is a map that just shows the boundary of the central waterfront area. So it's a very large area and it's a very high level plan. And as I mentioned, what we want to do is to be able to take these plans, turn them into official plan policy, and get more robust direction put into our official plans, which are statutory mechanisms for ensuring that an area is going to develop the way that everybody anticipates it and in accordance with the vision. So once we're done collecting feedback, we'll start to put together the draft amendments, and then we'll be taking that to City Council in the new year.
So when we talk about the Portlands, we talk about 350 hectares. It's massive and often looked at as underutilized. But it's not a blank slate when it comes to planning. There is a lot there today that we have to look at and take into account when we are planning for the future. And so this is our only port. The purple shows, with the yellow arrows, shows the active port dock walls right now. This is our only port in the city, and it's going to remain as such into the foreseeable future. And so we have to make sure that we can plan and account for that. And so you'll see that the purple shows the active port and industrial uses that go hand in hand. There's hydro infrastructure that powers the city. This is the gray-blue color that you can see on the map. As well, the film industry calls the Portlands home. There are a number of film studios, as well as the Pinewood Film Studio that is a gated film community. And so we have to plan for that and account for that when looking at creating these fine-grained street networks and patterns, as well as locating various land uses. There's a number of heritage buildings as well that we like to see in the Portlands that are landmarks and visual cues when we go down to the Portlands and we see the Portlands from afar. And as well, parks and open spaces. There is water and parks surrounding and running through the Portlands. These are all really important attributes that we look towards and help guide us in the planning of the Portlands.
In terms of land ownership, every time we go out to a public meeting, everybody always asks us, well, who owns the lands, what's happening with the lands? And so we always show an ownership map, and we've combined South of Eastern with the Portlands in this case, because obviously for the EA, we're looking at both. In the Portlands, a lot of the lands are municipally owned, and we haven't shown them here, but they're either on short-term leases or some really long-term leases. So there are, some 100-year leases that we have to account for in the actual planning. There's also federally owned land and provincially owned land. The Hearn, for instance, which is the kind of mustardy yellow, is provincially owned land, and that has actually been leased out to Studios of America. In the South of Eastern area, it's more private ownership. There is some city-owned lands, but we are cognizant that it is more private ownership. So that's one of the key considerations that we've been taking into account as we've been doing this planning. The other thing that we identified, and that's actually pretty important because we are doing a plan for 50 years, is what are the sites or the buildings that actually have regeneration or redevelopment potential, because this forms an underlying assumption for us. So the pink buildings are buildings that we assume either in the near, medium, or long term are either going to be redeveloped, revitalized, or go through regeneration. For instance, there's buildings that are in the middle of the future Riverway or River Valley, and so those buildings are likely either, and the uses will get relocated elsewhere. So this is just important for people to understand. There's also a lot of buildings, big structures that provide important city-serving uses that are going to remain. So there's a big Toronto Hydro Service Centre that, in a situation with an ice storm, all of the trucks that are coming out into the city to fix the power, they're coming from this particular service centre. So it's a really big building and it's a really important use. So we've been trying to take that all into consideration in the planning that we've been doing. There's 7 active development applications. One is relatively new that just got submitted in October. I'm not sure if people are familiar with it. They call it Project 21. It's an application by First Gulf for a major office development. First Gulf is looking at about 50,000 employees and 12.5 million square feet of office and commercial GFA on the site. The one thing that I will say is, and everybody recognizes that significant investment in higher order transit, like a relief line station or like a smart track or a regional express rail station, would be required to accommodate that amount of employees. We're actually not in the process that we're doing assuming that much, because those infrastructure projects are being dealt with through separate processes. So we're just assuming as much development as we can on the site with the infrastructure that's either existing or approved or that's under the purview of the environmental assessment. So streetcar and dedicated rights of way. So I do want to point that out, that there's different aspirations that have been submitted as part of the 21 Don Valley roadway application. 629 Eastern received council approval, I think 2 weeks ago, give or take. So that process is wrapping up. There's also an application in Villiers Island, 309 Cherry, which is currently under appeal at the Ontario Municipal Board. And then there's 2 applications in the Film Studio District, 300 commissioners for a 5-story self-storage warehouse, which also recently got appealed, and then a FedEx terminal at 475 commissioners, which the applicant has identified that it's interim use of 35 years when you're, I guess 35 years in a 50-year plan is interim. So what are we planning for?
So the Portlands is ideally situated and primed for revitalization. It's our next frontier. It's at the heart of a greater, much larger revitalization effort that's been undergoing for the last couple of decades in proximity to what's happening in East Bayfront and West Longlands, as we see the waterfront starting to become revitalized and bringing people back down to the water. It's where urban meets natural. It's right at the juncture of where the hard urban edge of the city meets the natural wilds of Lake Ontario Park and the Toronto Islands. It has a great relationship to water and green space through the ship channel, as well as the naturalized Don River, both ribboning through the Portlands. It has access to a number of key mobility routes that are currently planned and existing. We have highways, we have trail systems, bike systems, transit, as well as planned ferry, potentially for planned ferry access to the Portlands. So looking at all modes of transportation to and from the Portlands. As well, it has its own industrial character that we want to celebrate and enforce so that people can see from afar and within these identifiers that this is the Portlands and this is something special that's happening here. And then, of course, it has the existing infrastructure that is growing and calls itself home right now. We have the port and industry, as well as the power. So what's powering all of downtown Toronto, the hydro infrastructure, as well as the numerous film, creative and media industries that call the Portlands home. So planning for the Portlands has been ongoing for a long time, but it started in earnest back in 2006 with the initiation of the Donmouth Naturalization Project in 2006. During that part, back in 2011, it took a bit of a pause while the City, Waterfront Toronto and TRCA started to undergo what was called PLAI Phase 1, so the Portlands Acceleration Initiative, where we looked at finding opportunities and ways of accelerating development potential and flood protection in the Portlands. That concluded in 2012, and that when it started the Portlands Acceleration Initiative Phase 2, which is what we're currently undergoing right now, where we were given further direction to commence this high-level planning study, this framework plan for the Portlands, as well as undergo further transportation servicing master plan EAs, and as well as start looking at precinct planning for some of the new communities in the Portlands. In 2013, that's when we made the big ask. That's when we asked the 3 levels of government to fund the construction of the river and enabling infrastructure in its entirety. And so we're currently undergoing an extensive and exhaustive planning and due diligence phase that should conclude in about 2017, at which point, subject to funding, we'll be ready to start getting shovels in the ground and start building the river, which we are predicting will be concluded around 2023.
So there are a number of different initiatives that are also happening in this area that we're aware of and that we're working closely with the other teams and will continue to work closely. These are just some of them. So there's the Gardner East EA, there's Smart Track, RER, whatever it's getting called now, and the relief line assessments. There's also been the citywide work of feeling congested. From a servicing perspective, we're integrating the Lower Donlands Class EA in the work that we're now doing as part of the Portlands and South of Eastern EA. There's also the Waterfront Sanitary Servicing Master Plan update, which was initiated this year and actually results in a slight change to the alternatives that we originally presented last year, because they're now dealing with certain components. So there's been a slight change associated with that. And we've been working closely with my colleagues in Toronto Water on the Don River and Central Waterfront preliminary design to make sure that the design meshes with what we're doing and what we're proposing by way of infrastructure. And in terms of some of the other initiatives, the long-term waste management strategy that Solid Waste is currently undertaking, they're exploring relocation options for the Commissioner's waste transfer station. And they're also exploring how the city on a bigger scale should manage its waste over the long term. And then there's obviously the complete street guidelines, the lane width guidelines the city put out, and the bikeway network that's currently being planned. This is a little bit of a sneak peek, but what we're trying to do, because the Portlands is such a big area, and because when you also include south of Eastern in that area, what we're trying to do is create a whole bunch of series of vibrant and dynamic places. So we've sort of broken the Portlands up into a series of different places. We're recognizing what's happening in the south of Eastern area and the development aspirations of the within the Unilever precinct. That's been informing a lot of the decisions that we've been making in terms of land use and structure and how the area should grow and evolve. So what we're looking at, just for your information, for 2065 is roughly 23,500 jobs in the Unilever precinct. In the remaining south of Eastern area, employment growth over time, up to 9,250 jobs. And in the Portlands, we're basically creating a small city within a city. You know, when you add up 25,000 people and 25 to 30,000 jobs, that's 50,000 people, which is bigger than the town that I grew up in. So I think it's pretty neat. It's going to have everything that a city would have. It's going to have new, vibrant, mixed-use communities. It's going to have employment areas, and it's going to have the industrial uses that help to grow and maintain our city. The salt and the aggregate materials that come in by boat into the Portlands is what's literally building and maintaining our city. So they're important uses. And so we're really excited about the fact that we get to basically do a plan for an entirely new city district within the city.
So next steps, what's going to happen after today and next week when we do our workshops? Well, we're going to take a little breather. We're going to step back and try to digest all the feedback that we're going to be receiving over the course of these past couple of weeks. We had our SAC, our Stakeholder Advisory Committee meeting, our Landowner and User Committee meeting. We have today, and then we have 2 workshops coming up next week. A lot of information that we're hoping to receive that we're going to need to take some time to digest. We're going to start making refinements as needed and start finalizing the plans and creating some preferred solutions. We're going to start to draft the official plan amendments and the transportation and servicing master plan. And we're going to continue consulting with the public after that and stakeholders as needed, much smaller scale than what we're doing right now, and much smaller information as well. We appreciate that. It's a lot to digest today. And then we're going to report back to Council in the spring of 2016 and hold a statutory public meeting at that time.